The Forgotten Colony. Chapter 1. Silent Ruins. The small spaceship Aurora descended through the thick clouds of an uncharted planet. The sky was dark, with no stars visible. The planet had no name, only a code X-17. It was supposed to hold a human colony, built 20 years ago. But for the last 5 years, no messages had come from the settlers. Now, the Aurora was here to find out why. Commander Matthew Reed, a tall man with sharp eyes, stood at the front of the cockpit. "Landing in 2 minutes," said the pilot, Harper. Her hands were steady on the controls, but her voice had a strange tension. The rest of the team sat behind them, strapped into their seats. There was Dr. Simon Wells, the biologist who studied alien life. Next to him, Tracy Park, the engineer, checked her scanner. Beside her, Jackson Hayes, the security officer, loaded his rifle. "Just in case," he muttered. The ship touched the ground with soft hiss. Outside, the planet was quiet. Too quiet. "All right," Matthew said. "Helmets on. Oxygen levels are low, but breathable. We stick together." The team stepped out onto the dusty ground. The colony stood before them, rows of metal buildings, some broken, others intact. The wind howled between the structures, carrying a dry, strange smell. Tracy frowned. "Where are the lights?" "There should be power," Simon said. "The reactors last for decades." Jackson held up his scanner. No life signs. No people. No bodies. Only empty streets and hollow buildings. The vanished colony. They walked through the silent streets. The buildings had signs: medical bay, living quarters, research lab. They passed houses with doors left open, furniture covered in dust. Inside one home, a table was set with plates of food, now turned to dry powder. Chairs lay on their sides. It was as if people had been eating and suddenly vanished. "This is wrong," Harper whispered. Simon ran his fingers over a wall. There are no signs of struggle. No blood. No bones. Tracy shivered. They just disappeared? They reached the main control center, a large building with shattered windows. Inside, the air was heavy with dust. Screens lined the walls, all black. Matthew pressed a few buttons, and the system flickered to life. "There," he said. "Let's check the logs." Harper scrolled to the last recorded messages. The final entry was 5 years ago. The message was short. "They are inside the walls. Do not trust." Then static. The team exchanged looks. "They?" Jackson asked. "Who is they?" Nobody answered. Simon found security recording and pressed play. The grainy footage showed colonists running through the streets, screaming. The video shook as the camera fell to the ground. A shadow moved across the screen, something tall, thin, almost human but wrong. Then the screen went black. Tracy took a step back. "I don't like this." "We should leave," Harper said. Matthew clenched his jaw. "Not yet." The first encounter. The sun started to set. Shadows stretched long over the empty colony. They decided to stay the night inside the control center. Tracy locked the doors while Matthew and Jackson checked their weapons. Simon sat at a desk, reading files. The colonists were studying something in the caves north of here. Maybe whatever they found. A loud thud echoed through the room. Everyone froze. Jackson raised his rifle. That came from outside. Another thud. Closer. Then a voice. "Help me." It was a woman's voice, weak and trembling. Harper gasped. "Is that?" Matthew motioned for silence. He moved toward the window and peeked outside. A woman stood in the street, wearing a torn colony uniform. Her face was pale, her hair tangled. "It's a survivor," Tracy whispered. Matthew opened the door slightly. "Who are you?" The woman lifted her head. Her eyes were empty, black voids. Her mouth stretched into a twisted grin. She took a step forward, then another. Her body twitched unnaturally. Jackson grabbed Matthew and yanked him back inside. "Shut the door." Matthew slammed the door shut just as the woman lunged. A loud bang shook the walls. Then silence. Simon's breath was shaky. "That wasn't human." "No," Matthew said. "It wasn't." The nightmare begins. The team huddled inside the control center, weapons ready. "What was that thing?" Harper whispered. Simon swallowed. "I think it was a colonist." "No way," Jackson said. "That wasn't a person." Simon shook his head. "Not anymore." Tracy checked the security cameras. "Wait, there's more of them." On the screen, shapes moved through the streets. Dozens of them. Some crawled on all fours. Others twitched and jerked as they walked. Their faces were stretched, wrong, their eyes black holes. "They look human," Harper said, voice shaking. "They were human," Simon corrected. "Something changed them." Matthew gritted his teeth. "We can't stay here." Then the lights flickered. The screens glitched. A whispering sound filled the air. "Do you hear that?" Tracy asked. The voices rose, overlapping. They were whispering their names. Simon clamped his hands over his ears. "Make it stop." Jackson pointed at the door. "They're coming." Shadows gathered outside. Matthew raised his weapon. The door rattled. The whispers turned into a screech. The last thing they saw before the lights died was a hand, too long, too thin, pressing against the glass. Chapter 2. The Things in the Dark. The lights were gone. The room was silent except for the team's breathing. Outside, the whispers had stopped, but something waited beyond the door. Matthew gripped his rifle and whispered, "No one moves." Jackson kept his gun aimed at the door. "If one of those things gets in, I shoot." Simon clutched his head, still hearing the strange voices inside his mind. Tracy, sitting by the security monitors, tried to restart the power. Harper gripped her flashlight, her hand shaking. Then a slow, scratching sound began at the door. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Something was dragging its nails across the metal. Tracy's voice was barely a whisper. "It knows we're in here." Jackson's finger tightened on the trigger. "I don't care what it is. If it comes in, it dies." The darkness watches. Matthew signaled for them to stay silent. He pressed his ear against the door, listening. The scratching stopped. For a long time, there was only silence. Then footsteps. Slow, uneven steps. Moving away. Harper swallowed. Did it leave? Jackson exhaled. Maybe it... Bang. Something slammed into the door with unnatural force. Tracy gasped. Simon flinched. Harper dropped her flashlight. Bang. A second hit. The metal dented inward. "It's trying to break in," Simon whispered. Matthew motioned for them to back away. "We can't stay here. If that thing gets inside, we won't survive." Jackson looked at the vents. "We go through there." Tracy hesitated. "What if something is in the vents?" Matthew didn't answer. He just opened the vent hatch and climbed in first. One by one, the team followed. Inside the walls, the vent was cold and cramped. Their breaths echoed as they crawled through the narrow space. Harper whispered, "Where are we going?" Matthew answered, "To the hangar. We take the ship and leave." Tracy glanced behind her. "What if the ship is broken?" Simon shivered. "Then we're dead." They kept crawling. The only sound was the soft clank of metal as they moved. Then Harper froze. "There's something behind us," she whispered. Tracy turned and shined her flashlight into the darkness. The light hit a face, but it wasn't human. Its skin was gray and stretched too tight. Its eyes were black holes. Its mouth opened wide, too wide. Then it screeched, "Go!" Matthew shouted. They scrambled forward as the creature lunged into the vent. It moved too fast, twisting its body in impossible ways. Jackson fired his gun behind them. Bang! Bang! The shots echoed, but the thing kept coming. Simon kicked open a vent cover, and they tumbled into a dark hallway. Jackson turned and slammed the vent shut. The creature slammed against it, screeching, clawing, twisting. Harper gasped for air. "It's trapped for now." Matthew pulled them to their feet. "We have to keep moving." The Hall of Mirrors. The hallway was lined with shattered mirrors. The glass was cracked, but something was wrong. Simon was the first to notice. The reflections, they're moving on their own. They stopped and stared. Their reflections twitched. Harper's mirror self tilted its head unnaturally. Tracy's reflection blinked when she didn't. Matthew took a step back. "We need to go." But it was too late. The reflection stepped out of the mirrors. Jackson raised his rifle. "That's not possible." Simon shook his head. "Nothing here is possible." The copy smiled. Not normal smiles. Too wide. Too many teeth. The doppelgangers attacked. The battle in the dark. Matthew fired first, hitting his copy in the chest. The bullet went through, but the reflection did not fall. It laughed. Harper swung her flashlight at her doppelganger's head. The light flickered, and the copy faded like smoke. "Light hurts them," Harper shouted. Tracy turned on every flashlight they had. The doppelgangers shrieked as the light hit them. Their bodies melted into the shadows. Jackson kicked one into a broken mirror, and it shattered into nothing. One by one, the copies vanished. Matthew breathed heavily. They were waiting for us. Simon wiped sweat from his forehead. They were playing with us. Harper's hands trembled. They could have killed us any time. Matthew nodded. They're not just hunting. They're studying us. The hangar. They ran to the hangar. The spaceship Aurora sat in the center, its engines dark. The bay doors were locked. "We need power," Tracy said, rushing to control panel. Simon checked his scanner. "We're not alone." Figures crawled on the ceiling, moving like spiders. Their eyes glowed in the dark. Harper whispered. They were waiting. Matthew raised his gun. "We hold them off until Tracy gets the power back." Jackson fired first. The bullets tore through the creatures. but they kept moving. Simon grabbed a flare gun from a supply crate. He fired into the ceiling. The bright red light exploded, burning the creatures. They screamed, twisting and writhing before vanishing into smoke. Tracy worked fast. The power flickered. Matthew shouted, "Tracy, hurry!" The creatures crawled closer. The ship awakens. Finally, the ship's engines roared to life. Matthew grabbed Harper and Simon. "Get in the ship, now!" Tracy hit the final switch. The hangar doors opened to space. The creatures screeched as the vacuum sucked them out. Jackson grabbed onto a railing, holding on for dear life. Matthew reached for him. "Hold on." But a creature grabbed Jackson's leg. Jackson looked into its black eyes. It whispered his name. Then it pulled him into the void. Silence. The doors closed. The remaining team collapsed inside the ship. Harper sobbed. "He's gone." Simon whispered, "We have to leave." Matthew clenched his fists. "This isn't over." Tracy wiped tears from her face. "They're still watching us." Matthew turned toward the control panel. The ship was working, but something was wrong. The reflection on the screen smiled. Chapter 3. Nowhere to hide. The ship shook as Matthew pushed the controls. They had to leave this cursed planet now. Tracy sat at the navigation screen, fingers moving fast. "Engines are online. We can take off." Simon checked the scanners. Something is wrong. Harper wiped her tear-streaked face. "What now?" Simon pointed at the screen. "The planet, it won't let us go." The gravity had changed. Something pulled the ship down. Matthew cursed. "Hold on tight." The Aurora lifted off, shaking violently. But as they tried to escape, the planet's force grew stronger. The ship stopped in midair, like a giant invisible hand was holding it. Then the whisper started again, the voice of the dead. Jackson's voice echoed through the ship's radio. "Matthew, why did you leave me?" Harper gasped. "That's impossible." Tracy's hands trembled. "He's dead." But the voice continued. "Come back down. I'm waiting." Simon shook his head. "That's not Jackson. It's the planet." Harper covered her ears. "Make it stop." Matthew gritted his teeth and shut off the radio. The voice faded, but the whispers still filled the ship, like ghosts breathing in the walls. Simon's scanner beeped. His face turned pale. "They're inside." Harper's eyes widened. "Who?" Simon pointed down the dark hallway. The crawling shadows. Matthew grabbed his gun. Tracy reached for a flashlight. The hallway was dark. Too dark. The ship's emergency lights flickered. Then movement. Shapes crawled along the walls. Harper whispered. They got in. The shadows moved wrong. Their bodies were half human, half nightmare. Simon stepped back. "They're changing. They're learning." Matthew aimed. "We have to fight." A shadow lunged. Matthew fired. The bullet passed through, but didn't stop it. Harper shined her flashlight. The creature screamed and melted away. "Light hurts them," she shouted. Tracy grabbed a flare. "Use this." She threw it down the hall. The bright light filled the space, burning the shadows away. For now, Matthew exhaled. "We need to get out of here." Simon checked the scanner again. "The planet isn't just pulling us down." Harper frowned. Then what? Simon's voice shook. It's pulling us inside. The descent. The ship tilted. The controls froze. Tracy yelled, "We're falling." The Aurora was being dragged down, sinking into the planet like it was swallowing them whole. Matthew fought the controls. "I won't let this happen." Harper cried out, "Do something." Simon studied the scanner. His face turned white. The planet is alive. Tracy's eyes widened. "What?" Simon pointed at the screen. "It's not just a world. It's a creature." Matthew clenched his fists. "Then we're inside its trap." The lost colony. The ship crashed. Not into land, but into something soft. A city. Harper gasped. "Is this the lost colony?" The buildings were half-eaten, covered in black veins. Bodies lay frozen in time, their faces distorted, stretched, twisted. Simon whispered, "They weren't killed." Matthew frowned. "Then what happened?" Simon touched one of the bodies. It moved. Harper screamed. "They're still alive." The bodies twitched. Their mouths opened in silent screams. Their eyes filled with darkness. Then they turned to look at the team. The hive awakens. Tracy grabbed Harper's hand. "Run." The frozen colonists came to life. They twisted, cracked, bent backwards. Their skin peeled like paper, revealing black veins underneath. Matthew fired his gun. The bullets did nothing. Simon shouted, "They're already part of it." The planet itself was controlling them. The creatures lunged. The team ran into the mouth of madness. They ran through the ruined streets. Behind them, the colony chased them, moving in jerks and spasms. Simon tripped. Harper pulled him up. "Don't stop." Tracy pointed ahead. "That building." Inside, they rushed into a crumbling structure and barricaded the door. Silence. Then the whispers returned. Inside the walls, the room was dark. Tracy's flashlight flickered. Simon scanned the walls. "We're not alone." Matthew turned. "What do you mean?" Simon's voice shook. "There's something inside the walls." Harper stepped back. "You mean the walls are alive?" The walls breathed, a fleshy pulse. Then a face pushed to the surface. It was Jackson, or something that looked like Jackson. His face stretched, eyes hollow, mouth twisted into a grin. Matthew stepped back. "You're dead." Jackson's voice was wrong. "I never died, Matthew. I became something more." The walls shifted. More faces appeared. The lost colony. All of them merged with the planet. Tracy covered her mouth. "This isn't a planet. It's a prison." Harper shook her head. "No, it's a feeding ground." Jackson's twisted face grinned. "And now it's your turn." Chapter 4. No Escape. The room felt alive. The walls moved, breathed, and pulsed like a living thing. Jackson's twisted face grinned from the fleshy surface. His eyes were dark, hollow pits. "You don't have to run anymore," he said in a voice that sounded almost human. "Just let go." Matthew gripped his gun tighter. "You're not real." Jackson's smile widened. "I was real, but now I am part of something greater. And soon you will be too." The walls shifted. More faces pressed through the missing colonists. Their bodies fused into the living flesh of the planet. Harper stepped back. "This isn't a planet. It's a monster." Tracy grabbed her wrist. We need to move. Now. Simon scanned the room with his device. There's a way out, but we have to hurry. Jackson's voice echoed through the walls. You can't run forever. Then the walls ripped open. Black tendrils shot out, reaching for them. The chase begins. Matthew fired his gun, but the bullets passed the tendrils like smoke. Simon threw a flare. The bright light burned the black tendrils, making them shrink away. This way, Tracy shouted, leading them through a broken doorway. They ran down a narrow hallway, the floor twisting under their feet. The building itself was changing. Harper screamed as a hand burst from the wall, grabbing her ankle. Matthew yanked her free. The hand melted back into the flesh of the structure. Simon checked his scanner. His face turned pale. The planet is waking up. Tracy, clench your fists. Then we have to leave before it swallows us whole. The heart of the beast. They stumbled into a large, open chamber. The walls pulsed with dark, wet veins. At the center of the room stood a giant mass of writhing, twisting flesh. It looked almost human, but wrong. Harper gasped. What is that? Simon's voice was barely a whisper. The heart of the planet. Matthew gritted his teeth. If we destroy it, maybe we can break free. Jackson's voice echoed all around them. You can't kill what is eternal. The black tendrils rose from the floor, crawling toward them. Tracy threw another flare. The light burned the darkness away. Harper looked at Simon. How do we kill it? Simon checked his device. We need fire. Lots of it. Matthew pulled a grenade from his belt. Will this do? Simon nodded. That's perfect. Harper set down her last flare, keeping the shadows back. Tracy grabbed Matthew's arm. You need to be close enough. Throw it straight into the core. Matthew nodded. Cover me. The final stand. The tendrils lashed out. Harper screamed as one wrapped around her waist. Tracy swung a metal pipe, cutting the tendril in half. Harper fell to the ground, gasping. Matthew ran forward. The heart shuddered as if it sensed danger. Jackson's voice boomed. You can't win. Black shapes rose from the ground, twisted versions of the missing colonists. Their faces were stretched and melted, their bodies broken and reshaped. Matthew didn't stop. He pulled the grenade pin with his teeth and threw it straight into the pulsing heart. The moment it hit, the heart screamed, a terrible, inhuman sound. Then boom, the explosion. The room erupted in fire. The black veins caught flame, spreading through the entire structure. Harper grabbed Tracy's hand. Run. Simon pulled Matthew back as the walls collapsed around them. They raced through the burning corridors, the planet screaming in agony. Jackson's voice faded. No, this is not the end. The fire consumed the walls, turning the living flesh into ash. The team burst through the doors, back into the ruined colony. Above them, the sky ripped open. The planet's hull was breaking. Simon checked the scanner. The ship, it's free. Matthew grabbed his radio. Aurora, do you read me? The ship's AI crackled to life. Systems online, ready for takeoff. Harper let out a shaky laugh. We made it. Tracy smiled. Not yet. Let's go home. Escape. They ran toward the ship, dodging collapsing buildings and burning debris. The ground shook. The entire planet was coming apart. Matthew was the last to climb aboard. He hit the controls, lifting the ship off the ground. They soared into the sky just as the planet began to cave in on itself. Harper watched from the window, breathing hard. It's dying. Simon shook his head. It was never alive. It was something else. Something ancient. Matthew set the course for home. Whatever it was, it's gone now. The planet collapsed inward, disappearing into a swirling mass of darkness. Then silence. Tracy exhaled. It's over. Or was it the final warning? As they drifted through space, Matthew checked the ship's radio. Silence. Then a whisper. This is Jackson. If anyone can hear me, I'm still here. Matthew's blood ran cold. Harper covered her mouth. Simon shook his head. That's impossible. Tracy's hands trembled. We killed it. The whisper grew louder. You can never kill what is already inside you. The ship's lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the walls of the Aurora, something moved and whispered, "We are not done." The end?